What is going on, everybody? It is the Icebreaker here, back with another video in this dry period of the NHL offseason, August, back with some more hockey content for you guys. So continuing the trend here on this channel, I'm going to give you guys some more NHL standings predictions for next season. And to finish off the Western Conference, I got right here the Pacific Division for you guys. So just like I did with my Central Division rankings, I'm going from my last place team to my first place team in this division. And without further ado, let's get right into it. Kicking things off, the team that I have ranked last in this division for this season, I have the San Jose Sharks with a 29, 45, and 8 record for a total of 66 points. Now, although I don't necessarily think the Sharks are the worst team in the league, I still think in this division, I just don't see them standing much of a chance. They're a much older core that they have here. I just think they're kind of setting themselves up to be a rebuilding team. Inconsistent offense, kind of like last season, outside of like Timo Meier, who absolutely popped off last year. There wasn't a ton of offensive consistency there. And also, they don't have a clear starter in net. I know Adin Hill had a decent year. James Reimer was actually their better goalie, but not a number one goalie ideally on that team right now. So I don't trust their offense, don't trust their goaltending, and their defense is a little bit inexperienced for me. That's not to say that I didn't really like their offseason moves, because I think they did make some pretty decent additions. Marcus Nunavara, Steve Lawrence, Oscar Lindbaum, Nico Sturm. Those are decent depth pieces that can fill in the roster a little bit, but also train away Brett Burns. I know he was a little bit of an older defenseman, but still their best offensive guy. That's going to hurt their blue line quite a bit. For their top 5 scorers for this upcoming season, it's going to be the same guys. Timo Meier, I have him scoring over 30 goals, roughly going to be a 60 to 70 point guy. I don't think he's going to quite produce at the rate he did last season, although he was around near a point per game. Maybe, he puts a little bit less points up, but still he'll have a solid season. Thomas Hertl, to be honest, I like the player. I think he's going to have another great season, but I just don't know why he wanted to re-sign there, to be honest. I just think this team is not in the right position right now. They're kind of in a retool mode, and I just think with him being like 27, 28 years old, entering the prime of his career, arguably, I just don't see why he'd want to commit to this team long term, but that was his decision, so we got to respect that. Then we got Logan Couture, who's obviously a little bit older, but still should be good for about 25 goals, 50-ish points. Erik Karlsson has struggled to stay healthy ever since becoming a member of the Sharks, and his offensive game has taken a massive step back since leaving Ottawa. But obviously last year, even when he was healthy, he didn't actually have the worst of seasons, but obviously health has been the big question mark. If he is fully healthy, though, he plays a full season, he should be a 40 to 50 point player. I still think he's capable of putting up some pretty good offensive numbers. And then in 5th, I got William Eklund with about a half a point a game pace. I thought he played pretty solidly last year in that 9-game stint before he ultimately did not make the team full time. I think a full first season, rookie season for William Eklund, I think he's going to be one of the very few bright spots on this Sharks team. But with this Sharks team, a team that doesn't really have much of a direction right now, and bring in new coaching staff and new management, I think they're going to struggle a little bit this season, and that's why I have the Sharks last in this Pacific Division. Coming in at 7th in the Pacific, having a much better second season in the NHL, but still not good enough to make the playoffs, I got the Seattle Kraken with a 30, 40, and 12 record for a total of 72 points. I get it. This is an expansion team, so there probably shouldn't be much expectations for this team anyway. And I'm of that same feeling. I just don't think they're going to be a very competitive team at all. Well, a lot better than last year, like I said, because they actually did make quite a lot of upgrades. They didn't really lose anything. I'm not really a fan of the Martin Jones signing. I don't know why they needed to bring in another below average goaltender when they already have 2 that they got to work with right now. Obviously, it would come down to Philip Grubauer bouncing back. I think he will be able to bounce back, and that's why the Kraken are going to be a little bit better. Bringing Justin Schultz to add a little bit more depth on that defense, and of course, adding some more scoring punch, something that they very, very much needed. Andre Burakovsky, coming from the Colorado Avalanche, winning a Stanley Cup, coming off a 61-point season. He's going to be a great fit on that top 6, as well as Oliver Bjorkstrand. They didn't really have to give up much for him. Great trade for them. Obviously, Columbus was in a bit of a cap situation where a bit of a hole. They had to re-sign Patrick Laine, so they had to part ways with a very solid player in him. And that's another guy who's going to be very, very solid for them on that top 6. I have him having a 30-goal, 60-point season. I just think in a new role, maybe he gets top-line opportunities on this Kraken team, and I think he's going to have a pretty good season his first year with Seattle. But apart from that, I still don't think offensively they're quite on par with, league average even. I still think they're going to struggle a little bit because I just don't see any elite talent to carry them offensively. So I do think they're still going to have some struggles there, but that's probably going to be natural for them. And even their goaltending, they were coming off a really terrible goaltending season. Philip Grubauer was absolutely awful, and Chris Driedger was even worse, arguably. So those guys need to be a little bit better, and that's why I think they're going to be better. But to say that they're going to be Vezina caliber, I just don't see it, and that's a big reason why Seattle's probably not going to be that great either. I just ironed out some top 5 in scoring. Like I mentioned, Oliver Bjorkstrand, I think he's going to have a 60-point year. Andre Burakovsky, I think he'll take a slight step back, but not a significant step back, because I still think he's capable of producing roughly 50 points. I think he's a very solid top 6 forward. Jared McCann, coming off a very good season, should probably be a 25, 50-point guy. That seems very fair. Jaden Schwartz, if he's fully healthy, should have around 50 points. Underrated playmaker. Could get you 15 to 20 goals easily. That wouldn't surprise me. But in first on the team in scoring, maybe a little bit of a hot take, I got their rookie, Matty Beniers, leading the team in scoring, getting over 60 points. And I actually think he's going to win Rookie of the Year and get that Calder trophy, because I just think he's a dynamic player. Former second overall pick a couple of years back. Last season in a 10-game stint, he had 9 points. So he's shown that he can be potentially a superstar in the making. We'll see if he can make an amazing jump. I'm not going to set expectations way too high. I'm not sure if he's going to be a point-per-game player this season, but can he be a 60-point guy? I think it's a very possible outcome. So like I mentioned, in summary, I think the Seattle Kraken are going to be significantly improved and a lot better than when they were last season. But to say that they're going to be a playoff team, I think I'm just going to hold off on that for now. Coming in at 6th in the division, I got the Anaheim Ducks, finishing with a 36, 37, and 9 record for a total of 81 points. I got to be honest with you guys, I really like what the Ducks are doing, and I think they're moving in a very, very positive direction in the next couple of years. I mean, they kind of surprised me a little bit, especially the first half of the season. They played a lot better than what most people had pegged them. Obviously they tailed off and ultimately missed the playoffs by quite a lot, but I think there's going to be a lot of progression with this young core, and they're definitely moving in the right direction. They're rising up. A couple more years of maybe being a tweener team, not quite being good enough to make the playoffs, and I think they'll be a pretty elite team just a couple of years down the line. So main reason why I think they're going to be slightly better than last year, but still not quite good enough to make the playoffs, is because they made some pretty good additions. You add Frank Vetrano, who's a middle 6 forward, add some depth scoring there. Ryan Strome, they need a second line center, and he can obviously provide that. And then you add a very productive offensive defenseman in John Klingberg. Only a 1-year deal for him, but I think that's a huge get for that blue line. That defense looks much better now. So taking a look at their top 5 scorers, I got Trevor Zegras leading the way, of course. I think he can hit roughly 70 points. He can probably elevate his game even more going into his sophomore year. Could he be an 80, 85 point guy? I could see that happening, but it really has to come down to how big of a jump the offense is going to take on that team. If he can be an elite playmaker and have a lot of goal scorers surrounding him, because I don't ever think he's going to be like a perennial 30 goal scorer, but obviously he's mainly due to his playmaking, which is why he's such an elite player, and he will be an elite player for years to come. But yeah, 70 points seems pretty reasonable, I would think. Then I got Troy Terry scoring roughly 35 goals, I have him scoring 34 and about 60 points. This is roughly the same production he had last season. I could see him taking a slight step back. Honestly, it was just a huge breakout season. He came absolutely out of nowhere. He kind of needs to prove it to me again that he could produce at that rate. So for right now, I'm just going to keep it slightly lower than maybe he could produce next year, but he can obviously overshadow this and completely tear this up and be a 40 goal, 80 point guy. We'll see. And the new acquisition, Ryan Strome on that second line center hole. He'll be a 50-point guy. I don't think he's going to be quite as productive as he was with the Rangers, because apart from being on the Rangers, the rest of his career, he's basically been known as a third-line center and hasn't really produced a ton of offense to the rate he did with the Rangers, especially playing with a guy like Panarin. No longer having that luxury in Anaheim, I think that's going to take a little bit of a toll on his offensive production, although I still think he's going to be roughly a 50-point guy. I could definitely see him taking a significant step back. Then I got the rookie Mason McTavish having a very solid rookie season, being roughly a 40-point guy, over 20 goals. I think he's just got the makings of being a very good center in this league. I don't know. Obviously, he's a third overall pick. I'm just not sure if he has first-line center potential. Obviously, when you're drafted that high, you would think he would. I don't know if he's going to be like that, but can he be a really good number 2 center in the coming years? I think that's very reasonable. But yeah, as a rookie, a 20-goal scorer, 40 points, I think is very fair for him. I think he's going to be one of the better big power forward centers in the league, in my opinion, coming down the line, moving forward in a couple of years. And lastly, I'll put Jamie Drysdale in that top 5 in scoring. I just see him taking another offensive jump. He had like 32 points or 31 points, I believe, last season as a rookie. And I think he has the makings to be a number 1 defenseman in the NHL. I don't know if he has elite offensive upside, but I still think he can be a perennial 40, 50 point player. And, obviously starting next season, I could see him taking a pretty significant jump, being over that 40 point threshold. So overall, I think this Ducks team is be a little bit better than last season. They got an improved defense, potentially an improved offense as well. And of course, you got John Gibson in goal. Still think he's one of the top goalies in the NHL. So they're going to be a lot better, but still, I do not see them making the playoffs. I do think they still have some holes that they have to fill and they have to improve upon, but they will be very competitive, and the rebuild is going to be wrapping up pretty soon in Anaheim. All right, so now I got a bit of a hot take coming in here. I'm probably going to lose some people with this one, but I will explain myself here. 5th in the Pacific Division, I got the Los Angeles Kings with the 41-32-9 record for a total of 91 points. And unfortunately, I have them just barely missing the playoffs next season. Now, I could be totally wrong with this prediction, but it's just kind of a hunch that I have. I know there's a lot of people who think that the jump that the Kings took could ultimately mean that they're going to take even another jump coming into next season. They could be like a 2nd seed in the Pacific. And you know what? Maybe that's a possibility because the Pacific isn't the strongest division. But for me, there's still some things I can't quite get my head around on this team. I'm just not fully sold on what they have as a whole to this point. I think they kind of already were a bubble team. And despite some additions like the Kevin Fiala signing or trade, obviously is a huge get that's going to improve their offense quite a bit, obviously. But I still don't consider this to be a particularly elite offensive team. Combined with the fact that their goaltending is kind of shaky, I'm not fully sold on them right now. And then, of course, their blue line, as underrated as you might think it is, or as people might think it is, especially when you lose guys like Oli Mata and Troy Stetcher, who in my opinion were 2 very solid blue liners on that team. I think they got a little bit more work to do on that front. For me, it's mainly the offense and especially the goaltending. I mean, Jonathan Quick had a pretty decent year, but even so, he was kind of just average for the majority of the season. And this was like his best season in the last 4 or 5 years. So the fact that an average goaltender is what took you to the playoffs, I mean, that does say a lot of how good they were. But I'll be honest, I think this team kind of overachieved a little bit last year. I just think they're not ready yet to be a contender. And even though this division, there's room for opportunity, there is some cause for concern, in my opinion, at least. Everyone's talking about how this core, they have a great, bright future. They have a lot of elite prospects coming up. But honestly, for a team that people claim is young and up and coming, it was in fact their veterans that carried this team into the playoffs. The Anze Kopitars, the Philip Deneaus, the Jonathan Quicks, the Adrian Kempes of the world. Those were their core guys last year. So I guess if you get, another year of development with Sean Durzi and Quentin Byfield and maybe Gabe Vilardi, he can finally step up. Maybe this Kings team is that much more dangerous. But a lot of those older guys, I'm just not sure how much they have left in the tank. Anze Kopitar, still a very solid center. I could see him being around 60 points, but obviously I have him taking a little bit of a step back offensively. He's just not the elite offensive player he once was. I would argue he's maybe not even a prototypical number 1 center anymore. Then you look at Philip Deneau. He had a career offensive season, 27 goals. He's just not that type of goal scorer. Obviously, he could still be roughly a 50, 45 point player. But the offense, I don't know if that's sustainable for him. I just never really saw him as an elite offensive center, I guess. Having a fully healthy Drew Doughty obviously helps, and if he's healthy, should be roughly a 45-point defenseman. But obviously, health is always the question. He's become a little bit more injury prone now, and if he can't stay healthy long-term for this Kings team, that definitely is a massive hole. And, with the blue liners they shedded this offseason, it could be more of an issue than it was last year. Now, even look at Kevin Fiala. Although improves that offense, I do not think he's going to have the same elite offensive year he did with Minnesota. I just think the Minnesota Wild are a significantly better offensive team than the Kings. Even when you add him to that offensive group, he still should be a 65-point player, roughly. Maybe he can hit 70, but I just don't think he's going to be at that level, especially with the guys he has around him. Overall, even if people think this team will take the next step, I still view them as kind of a tweener team. And the issues, the causes of concern that I have for this team is why I ultimately don't think they're quite going to be good enough next season to make the playoffs. Now, maybe I'm in the minority in this. People can obviously be mad at this take and they'll obviously think the Kings are going to prove me wrong, but so be it. This is my opinion. I just feel like there's teams in this division that are better than the Kings, but we'll see what happens. Coming in at fourth in the Pacific Division, I got the Vancouver Canucks with a 45-31-6 record for a total of 96 points, and I do have them making the playoffs as the Western Conference's first wild card. The last few years, I've been kind of buying what the Canucks have been selling, or actually maybe just last season, I thought they were going to take that next step. And although I believe I picked them to have 92 points and they had just that, but I had them third in the Pacific, but they ended up missing, obviously. But a full season under Bruce Boudreau, I think this Canucks team is deep and good enough to make the playoffs. If it was a 90-95 game season, I think this Canucks team would have snuck in, but obviously they hired him a little bit too little too late, so they obviously missed out. But I think this team has an exciting young core with a ton of elite players, and I just think they are ready to make that jump. When you have JT Miller on your team leading the way offensively, had a near 100-point season, I still think he's going to be in the 90-point range. An elite, underrated two-way player, honestly. Obviously, Elias Pettersson played a lot better, especially the second half of the season. He can return to form, should be a 75 to 80-point guy easily. Quinn Hughes, one of the most dynamic offensive defensemen in the league. And Brock Besser looking to have a little bit of a bounce-back season. Put the puck in the net like he should. He should be your 25-30 goal scorer. And you guys like Connor Garland, who had a really good season, should put up roughly the same production. Bo Horvat had a great year as well as the number 2 center. Obviously, very solid two-way guy as well. You have other young guys coming in. This Kuzmenko guy they just signed from the KHL, maybe he makes an immediate elite impact that could just make their offense that much better. Niels Honglander had a rough second year, but maybe he bounces back and still puts up decent numbers. And Vasily Podkolzin is another guy who could take another step forward in his second NHL season. Those are a bunch of Canucks that I just named, but I just think this team has the tools and the skill set to take another step forward, especially with the great coach in Bruce Boudreau, who historically has coached some great regular season teams, and I think the Canucks have the recipe to be a pretty good team. Under him, they were a much better defensive team, believe it or not. And, of course, Thatcher Demko taking another step forward. He was very solid last year, top 10 goaltender in the NHL, unquestionably. If he has more defensive support, hopefully Bruce Boudreau improves that defense even more. He should be much, much better, and the Canucks, as a result, as a whole, will be a much better team. Not to mention that they also added Curtis Lazar, a little bit of a depth piece, and Ilya Mikheyev, who was playing in a third-line role on the Toronto Maple Leafs. He had 21 goals. If he can bring some of that goal scoring to the Canucks in a third line, maybe he gets even an elevated role, a second-line role potentially. I think that's just added scoring depth for this Canucks team. And regardless of what you think about this team or not, if you don't think they're a playoff team, or you think they're just too young or too immature, or just this team is a bunch of frauds, whatever you want to say, I just think this is a talented enough roster and they should make the playoffs next season. Coming in at third in the Pacific Division, I got the Calgary Flames with a 45-28-9 record for a total of 99 points and still being a pretty good regular season team. Now, don't get me wrong, this Flames team is not going to be as elite as it was last season, especially when you lose 2/3 of that top line that heavily carried their offense. Johnny Gaudreau walking to Columbus, and of course trading away Matthew Tkachuk. It looked like all was lost for this Flames team. It literally looked like they were going down in flames, no pun intended, and they were entering a rebuild. But man, what a turnaround of an offseason by Brad Treliving in that Matthew Tkachuk trade, bringing in Jonathan Huberdeau, who was another 100-plus point player, and Mackenzie Weegar, who is arguably Florida's best, most complete defenseman. You bring him into an already stacked blue line on that Flames team. This Flames team is still going to be good. Now, the offense probably is still going to take a step back, but you bring in an elite playmaker like Jonathan Huberdeau, who probably still will be hovering around 95 to 100 points. Maybe not have the elite season he had last year, but still will be a very, very productive player. Now, obviously, you still have Elias Lindholm, who's a pretty good number 1 center. Obviously, maybe not going to be a point per game, but can he still be a 70-point player, 30-goal scorer? I think that's a possibility. You got Tyler Toffoli and Andrew Mangiapane as well, good secondary scorers. Tyler Toffoli played really well under Montreal and obviously had a hot start with Calgary, kind of tailed off towards the end. But, fully healthy Tyler Toffoli plays a full season. He should be a 25-goal scorer, roughly 50 points, as well as Andrew Mangiapane. I don't think he's going to produce at the same rate, 35 goals. That might be tough to replicate for a guy of his caliber, but maybe that was just a breakout season. He can prove that he is that consistent 30-plus goal scorer. We'll have to see. I have him, however, taken a little bit of a step back, but maybe he can still replicate that. We'll see what happens with him. And of course, Michael Backlund, I have him 5th in scoring. You could put any of the defensemen who could put up over 40 points like Rasmus Andersson or whatever, but Michael Backlund over the course of his career been a consistent 40, 45 point player as a number 2 center. I see no reason why he shouldn't do that again. He's still like only 32 years old, so he's still pretty much in the prime of his career. So yes, say what you want about this Calgary Flames offense. Maybe it's a bottom 10 offensive team in the league, but I'm still very much sold on their defense. I'm very much sold on their goaltending. Despite Jacob Markstrom having a rough series against the Edmonton Oilers, he's still a top 10 goaltender in the NHL. And of course, behind Daryl Sutter as their head coach with that defensive system in play, there's no reason why the Calgary Flames shouldn't defend and goaltend their way to wins. Even if they don't score at the same rate they did last season offensively, they still have elite players like Jonathan Huberdeau and arguably Elias Lindholm as well. I think they're still in a solid position to be a top 3 team in this Pacific Division, and people should not underrate a defensive team, especially one of this caliber. They will make the playoffs. Coming in at number 2, second place in the Pacific Division, I got the Vegas Golden Knights with a 48-27-7 record for a total of 103 points. People may not like this pick. They're probably going to want me to swap this team with the LA Kings in that second spot. But for me, a big reason why the Vegas Golden Knights just barely missed the playoffs, by the way, is because they're bad luck in health. I'm fully convinced a fully healthy Vegas team will be back in playoff contention, in Stanley Cup contention rather. I just think their team is, as a whole, just too talented to miss the playoffs. Say what you want about their rough offseason. They didn't really add anybody. And of course, you lose Dadonov, you lose Coughlin, Matthias Janmark, you trade away Max Pacioretty for literally nothing. That's a big L on them, no question about it. I won't deny that. But just remember, with a lot of the same roster still in play, this was considered a legit Stanley Cup contender, and this was before they added Jack Eichel, who obviously was coming off a rough injury and coming back into the fray. He wasn't quite himself, but I believe a full season of Jack Eichel fully healthy, he will have a massive bounce back season and return to the superstar center he is. So I have him scoring over 35 goals, about 90 to 95 points. I think he's got the skill set to do it. He's obviously still an elite player. He's going to prove it this season. Mark Stone, fully healthy, is an above a point per game player, one of the better playmaking wingers, one of the better two-way wingers in the NHL, is just an impactful player when it comes to winning. And on this Vegas team, he is an elite captain. Other guys that can iron out right now, I have Jonathan Marchessault scoring similar to what he did last season, about over 60 points, be a 25 to 30 goal scorer. Shea Theodore is a 60-point defenseman, fully healthy in my opinion. And obviously, he didn't really come off the greatest of years. I thought he was a little bit inconsistent offensively, but I think he can get back to his 60-point pace. And Chandler Stevenson playing in a top-line role should be a 50 to 60-point guy easily. I could go on and on. Riley Smith, William Karlsson. There's a lot of really solid players on this team. So overall, say what you want. Rough offseason, I get it, but fully healthy. They still have a great offensive core. Their defense is still solid as ever, along with, like I said, Shea Theodore, with Alex Pietrangelo, and, Zach Whitecloud, and Braden McNabb, and Alec Martinez. Is a very good D-core. So yeah, still a good team overall, and I don't think people should, roll over this team quite yet. They are still a contender in my eyes, or at the very least a dark horse contender. We'll see how the goaltending pans out for them, how it shapes up their season. But this Vegas team, especially in this division, will still be a 100-plus point team, fully healthy, obviously. They got to be healthy, but this is definitely still a playoff team in my mind. Coming in at number 1, the team I have winning the Pacific Division quite easily. I don't think this is a debate. The Edmonton Oilers, 54-24-4 record for a total of 112 points. They will run away with this division. The Oilers are coming off a very good, successful playoff run, going all the way to the Western Conference Finals. It didn't end well. They got swept by the Colorado Avalanche, but they ended up winning the Cup. I still think Edmonton is an elite team. You got Connor McDavid, Leon Draisaitl in the prime of their careers. I think this Oilers team is going to absolutely pop off this season. And with the additions they made with Jack Campbell, as well as Matthias Janmark, add a little bit of depth scoring. They got an improvement in goaltending. Starting goaltender in Jack Campbell is going to be an upgrade over Mike Smith or Mikko Koskinen, whatever. You have him and Stuart Skinner likely as the tandem. This is a Stanley Cup contender in my mind. I still think there is some tweaks to be made on the defense. I don't really like Tyson Barrie that much, especially on the defensive end. Although Evan Bouchard having a massive breakout season last year could be huge for them, even if he takes another step forward and fills in a number 1 defenseman role. Darnell Nurse is still a very solid defenseman, even though he's overpaid a bit, in my opinion. Cody Cece's obviously coming off a pretty good season for his standards. If he can repeat that or even be remotely close to that, they'll be in pretty good shape. Re-signing Brett Kulak, very steady two-way defenseman. Seeing in Montreal, was very impressed with him, so that was a big addition to bring back. And then in terms of their offense, they're obviously elite with Connor McDavid, who in my opinion is the best player in the NHL and will lead the NHL in scoring once again. I'll have him scoring near 50 goals. Well over 120 points. Obviously, he had about the same last season, but I think he's going to have a little bit more, especially with, the improvements they made on offense. I think a full season of Evander Kane, he will be a 40-goal scorer. He was playing at a 40-goal pace last year and be roughly an 80-point guy. Leon Draisaitl should be 110, 120 points, roughly 50 goals like last season. I think he's obviously an elite player, top 5 player in the NHL. Ryan Nugent-Hopkins should be a 60 to 70 point guy, one of the better playmakers on the team. And Zach Hyman, as long as he's playing with McDavid, he will find success like he did in the playoffs. He was a point per game guy, really stepped up for them. Should be a 25 to 30 goal scorer. I think he has that in him. Playing with elite players, he is going to find that success. And you're also looking for some, bounce backs or better seasons from guys like Jesse Puljujarvi, who had a bit of a rough season, kind of been snake bitten. I still think he has the tools, the skill set to be a 25 to 30 goal, 60 point guy. Kailer Yamamoto's coming off a 20 goal season as well. Maybe even like Philip Broberg on that blue line can make that defense a lot better. Coming into his official rookie season, could make an immediate impact. This Oilers team is stacked from the top down, in my opinion. They're going to be one of the better offensive teams in the league. They're being exciting, electric team in that Pacific Division. I think they're going to run away with it. They're going to win that division quite easily, and they'll be a legit Stanley Cup contender, trying to compete with the likes of the Colorado Avalanche to win that Stanley Cup with the elite talent they have around with Connor McDavid and Leon Draisaitl. That's going to wrap up my season predictions, my standings predictions of the Pacific Division for this upcoming season. Let me know what you guys think in the comments section. Do you agree with this list? Do you disagree with this list? Probably a lot of you will. This was more of a controversial take with specific teams like the Kings and Golden Knights, let's say. But yeah, let me know what you guys think. This was a lot of fun to do. I love doing these predictions. I love the engagement in the comments. If you disagree, make sure you tell me why. I'd love to hear your thoughts. As always, I'm open to discussion, open to all that. You can be as nice or as rude as you want. I can take the heat. Don't matter to me. I'm just doing this stuff for fun. But yeah, as always, thank you guys so much for watching this video, and I will talk to you in the next one. I'll see you guys later.